Welcome to the League of Women Voters program on cannabis and how it happens and how it's controlled in our county. Our program is called Cannabis Impacts and Opportunities in Santa Cruz County. Our format today will be webinar style. Everyone but speakers will be muted. Each of our panelists will have an opportunity to give a 5-minute introduction, followed by a discussion of the prepared questions. The audience may submit questions via chat, and those questions will be addressed at the end of the program. And now Robin Bolster-Grant will take over our program.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks so much for being here. We have a terrific panel for today's introductory discussion. There's no way to cover everything in an hour and a half, so I'm sure the League will be providing additional opportunities down the road. These panelists each bring a wealth of knowledge and experience and perspectives from all sides of the policy discussion surrounding cannabis. I've personally worked with each of them and have learned more than I can describe from all of them. I've not acted as a moderator before, so please be patient. I'll try to keep things more or less in some kind of linear fashion. So Darren Story is a licensed cannabis cultivator and distributor here in Santa Cruz County. Darren was an early participant in the discussions around the county's rollout of its commercial cannabis ordinance. He challenged us at the county with his questions and insights about the industry and the industry needs. Darren can speak from that perspective and describe the challenges and successes he has experienced navigating the county's commercial cannabis permitting and licensing scheme. Darren. Bryce, I introduce all. Told you, not experienced at this. Bryce Berryessa operates one of the more successful county dispensaries and was also an early participant in the local conversation about how legalization would or should be handled by the county. Bryce can also provide his insights about the challenges facing our retail partners in navigating the maze of state and local rules and regulations. Both Darren and Bryce are great ambassadors for the local industry and are each committed to protecting our community. Sam LoForti is the current cannabis licensing manager, AKA Cannabis Czar, succeeding me in that role and working tirelessly to revise and improve on the work our team did in the early days. Sam came to the county from the private sector, so brings an incredible wealth of knowledge about the industry and applying that experience to his role as the top regulator for the county. And Steve Carney is our chief deputy with the sheriff's office on temporary assignment to the Cannabis Licensing Office, or CLO. Steve, along with 2 other sheriff deputies assigned to the CLO, has led countless enforcement actions against those folks either unable or unwilling to participate in the legal cannabis industry. Much of what Steve does is to help educate folks about the rules regarding commercial cannabis. Welcome to all our panelists. Darren, if you would, tell us a bit about your background in the industry, highlight some of the challenges and successes you've had in getting your business off the ground and where things stand for you now.
Okay, thanks, Robin. I appreciate it. Yeah, so I'm born and raised in Santa Cruz County. I grew up down here in Watsonville, started in Freedom, and then went to college in Arizona. After that, I moved up to San Francisco and got my master's in economics and finance, and then kind of got dragged back down here. Growing up around here in agriculture, mostly apples and leafy greens. It was all conventional back then, so I wanted nothing to do with this industry, and moved up to San Francisco and enjoyed the city life, and then got kind of dragged back down. I was pitched on this project by a bunch of friends who had been growing cannabis and other biological crops for years, and they told me about this project, and it sounded really good, and I asked them, well, you know, where's it at? And they said, oh, it's in Watsonville. I said, oh, no. Anywhere but Watsonville. I'm not moving home. But you know, it was a fortuitous turn of events, and we ended up down here. We took over operations on a 37.5 acre farm on Green Valley. It was all conventional flowers, and since then we've rehabbed the entire facility, and we started with growing organic blueberries in 2015, and a couple of our partners were working with WHAM in Santa Cruz, and they had just lost their permit up in Davenport. Sorry, not their permit. They lost their land up in Davenport, so they had a patient base of about 2,000, and they were going to really struggle to find how they were going to fill those patients' needs. So we worked with them on moving the garden down here to our property, and we've been able to expand and serve the patient base, and also navigate moving from Prop 215 over to the legal adult use market. Still a large majority of what we grow is for WHAM's patients, and also medical. All our licenses are still medical, even though it doesn't make a difference now. Navigating the use permit process in Santa Cruz County has definitely been a challenge, but we all got through it, and I think every step of the way with yours and Sam's input, we just continue to improve and refine and figure out the best way to give good actors an opportunity to start a business and create a viable economic, little small business in Santa Cruz, provide jobs, regenerate some of our soils down here that have been beaten up through the years. And I think we're really on a good path right now. If everything was easy, it wouldn't be worth it. So we understand the challenges, even though they sometimes get frustrating. But right now, I think Santa Cruz County is just well positioned in the entire country to really capitalize on the collaboration between regulators, farmers, and other industry participants. So we're really happy with where we're at. We love working with you and Sam, and I think now is a really good opportunity for us to start engaging a lot with some of our neighbors. We already are heavily interactive with some of the other farmers, the non-cannabis farmers, like Live Earth, and you name it, the Pashoots, you name it. If there's someone in agriculture in South Santa Cruz County, we're working with them in some capacity or another, and it's also an exciting time to be in agriculture. So yeah, thanks for everything, and there's a long way to go, but I feel like all that hard work is starting to pay off for everybody.
Nice. Thank you. Bryce, can you tell us about yourself and your role managing one of the county's 12, I think, licensed dispensaries?
Hi, everybody. My name is Bryce Berryessa. Thank you for having me here. I have been involved in cannabis and kind of policy making probably as long as any operator in the county. I helped co-open one of the very first dispensaries in the county, and kind of out of necessity and a hope to ensure that we had stability in our business, we started working and dialoguing with the county, trying to push forward regulation. And so my previous entity was actually the first ever licensed cannabis business by the county of Santa Cruz. And, that was a long and arduous process that involved many years and lots of community dialogue, both from the board of supervisors and staff and special interest community groups, as well as the cannabis industry. And so, it's quite a long process. I feel like most of us lost a lot of hair and sleep over the process. But I think what we came up with was one of the more progressive and well-working cannabis ordinances in the state of California. And we do have one of the most mature retail cannabis markets. As far as what that means is we've had dispensaries longer than most anywhere else in the state, first in the city of Santa Cruz, and then in the county of Santa Cruz. Capitola was the most recent incorporated city to open up to retail, and Watsonville actually just allowed for licenses. And so by the end of this year, I actually will have 3 dispensaries in the county, one in the county of Santa Cruz. I have one currently in the city of Capitola, and we'll be opening one in Watsonville, hopefully in about 6 months' time. And so, I do business in Santa Cruz City, Capitola City, Watsonville City, and the unincorporated area of Santa Cruz, because I have cultivation, manufacturing, and distribution businesses in addition to the retail. And so one thing that's interesting to note in a county as small as Santa Cruz, you know, the unincorporated county has jurisdiction over the non-incorporated cities. And so there's a different set of folks that we deal with in Watsonville than we deal with in the county. Same thing in Capitola, same thing in Santa Cruz. And so each jurisdiction has their hurdles. Some things are harder in the county than they are in Watsonville. You know, there's different personalities involved, but I do think that we're fortunate in Santa Cruz County in that every jurisdiction that is allowed for it, which is most now with the exception of Scotts Valley, is pretty supportive and actually views it as a positive benefit to the community rather than something to be shunned and ostracized. And I think that that's happened over time. And, you know, it's been a lot of part by education and dialogue, but I also, you know, I attribute a lot of that to actors like the United Way, the Pajaro Valley PTA Association, and community prevention partners have been very forthwith and active in trying to educate community members about the pros and cons of cannabis. And there's been, you know, many years of very constructive dialogue trying to understand that an actual regulated marketplace meets a lot of the objectives to keep cannabis off the streets, to ensure that there's a safer, transparent supply, and actually in many instances decreases the amount of underage consumption. So I think, you know, through that dialogue, and we were talking a little bit before the panel started between Robin and Sam, is, you know, the data is still nascent. There's a lot more information that we need before we can make really sound decisions. But what it seems to be consistent is in a lot of these communities that have regulated cannabis, especially retail, crime has gone down. The value of the neighborhoods in which they're located has gone up, and access has increased for people that want to get it in legitimate ways, which provides a whole slew of benefits from tax revenue to a safer product. And so in addition to operating businesses, I've been very active in trade associations. I think it's really important to push this industry forward in a way that works for industry while valuing and balancing the community's needs from a myriad of perspectives. So I also co-founded the California Cannabis Manufacturers Association, which is a statewide trade association that represents manufacturers in the industry. And I had the great honor of being on the board of directors as an elected member for the California Cannabis Industry Association during the transition from the Prop 215 quasi-regulated market through to the regulated market that we have now. So I've gotten a lot of perspective both on a local level from policy and as well as on the state level. So I appreciate you having me here.
Nice. Thank you. Sam, tell us about yourself and your background.
I'm the current cannabis licensing manager by education. I'm a geologist. I was a practicing geologist in the state for a long time. I still actually maintain my professional registration. I'm a chemist by necessity. I've focused my geologic career on mining, environmental remediation, and I've taken the skills that I've learned from understanding environmental law and environmental regulations, which translated nicely to an emerging cannabis industry. In 2017, I quit my job as a geologist and started my own consulting firm to focus on cannabis, because I felt like if I could permit a mine or a hazardous waste treatment plant in California, I could permit a cannabis cultivation operation. It was a pretty easy transition, but it's been very fascinating to watch the regulatory changes at the state level, most of which are not based on law, but they're actually just changing their regulations, and the opinion of the regulators at the top of the individual state departments has changed, which has shifted the marketplace without changing any rules. It's very interesting and an odd dynamic that as a scientist, I never had to deal with before, because the rules are set, regs are set, you work within them and you go. Cannabis is this mushy regulatory nonsense that makes it difficult for people to get in and stay in. At the county level, since taking this position, the rules have shifted. When Robin left, Prop 215 was still on the books. Shortly after I came in, Prop 215 was removed from the books. That was the old medical laws. So I've really focused my time at the county on improving the licensing process as we've changed the regulations somewhat. And I've been blessed to have an awesome team at the county who are proactive, and we've worked within our bounds to focus our compliance program really on education of our operators as the regs have evolved. And we've had a solid enforcement program, which helps to bolster the legal market and remove some of the safety and human health issues associated with the illicit market. So I think we've maintained a balance. Some people a lot of people probably disagree with me. I hope we're doing a good job in the public's eye, but I think one of the big stigmas that I'm hoping our department and the industry can help address is there's a huge difference between the illicit market and the legal operators. The legal operators, we see them all the time. We're constantly reviewing their operations. The illicit market, things happen, right? People are frustrated with safety risks associated with that market. And the legal market, there's a lot more to it. A lot more regulations, a lot more safety issues being addressed, diversions really addressed. So, I'm hoping that as time goes on, people will gain a better understanding of that. I think that's it for me.
Right on. Thanks, Sam. And Steve Carney, give us a little of your bio and your perspective from the enforcement side of things, please.
Well, good morning. As Robin said, my name is Steve Carney. I'm a chief deputy with the Santa Cruz County Sheriff's Office. And I've lived in Santa Cruz County my whole life, and I've been a police officer in the county for 29 years. Historically, I've pretty much worked through all the ranks at the Sheriff's Office to where I'm at now, and have a pretty extensive background in regards to cannabis enforcement back in the mid-90s all the way to where we're at today. In late 2018, I was asked to temporarily, which is, I guess it's all what the definition of temporary is, because here we are in 2021 and I'm still there. But I was asked to move over to cannabis licensing to assist with the enforcement program because there were some challenges with gaining compliance from individuals who just prefer to stay in the illicit black market as opposed to moving into the regulated market. And then there's frustration on behalf of the legal operators that were trying to survive the illicit market. So late 2018, 2019, I came into the cannabis licensing office. At the time, as I said, there's 2 sheriff's deputies assigned. That's when Robin was there. And the whole, the operation was solely just compliance-based, of mailing letters to violators, mostly illicit violators, trying to get voluntary compliance to come into the regulation. And I think we all learned real quickly that there had to be a stronger enforcement approach. So starting in 2019 with some small changes to the law, we kind of redirected our enforcement efforts and started conducting more criminal investigations as the starting point, and then would work through each case, not with the goal of bringing people into the criminal courthouse, but more so just using criminal enforcement efforts to motivate people to either get out of the illicit market or move into the legal market. And so we've been doing that now since 2019. As Sam says, it's we believe we're being effective at what we're doing. Again, I've kind of lived through the era of going through the criminal court system, and honestly, cannabis cases in the criminal court system continue to be kind of a waste of time. And what I mean by that is there's some criminal investigations that need to go to the criminal courthouse, but for the most part, I think the days of doing jury trials and doing running cannabis cases through the criminal process are kind of a thing of the past. So we're very sensitive to that, and we kind of pick and choose what cases need to be addressed in that manner. But our whole goal continues to be compliance and using the enforcement program to gain compliance or move illicit operators out of the system. And what we found is about 80% of our work is done, 80 to 90% of our work is done with strictly illicit operators. And then the 10%, sometimes it kind of goes into the lawful operators. What we're very sensitive to as well is that as the lawful operators learn the regulations and the legalities as we do, that we're not there to bring heavy enforcement on small technical violations. And I feel that with the help of Robin's law firm and Sam as the manager, that when we do run into small technical violations, we pretty much stay out of those technical violations and let those get resolved through the licensing office and or Robin's firm or whatever, as opposed to just finding the opportunity to bring heavy enforcement down on the lawful operators. So having said all that, it's been a busy past couple of years for us. It continues to be busy. We find we've seen an uptick lately of the electrical bypasses, theft of electrical, and commonly what comes along with those cases is they overload the power grid and they catch the transformers on fire, which we're all very sensitive to the fire hazard in our community. So we've seen a little uptick in those. We continue to see our illicit butane honey oil labs. And 65–70% of those are located after they explode, and typically they're in residential environments. So that's about all I have with regards to enforcement, and appreciate you guys having me here today.
Thank you, Steve. By way of my own background, I spent nearly 20 years working for the county, a little over 17 years in the planning department, and a year and a half or so as the second cannabis licensing manager. My experience in planning included stints as a resource planner, implementing our environmental protection ordinances, a project planner, and then finally the manager of the code compliance section. Along the way, for some reason, I decided to go to law school, and upon receiving my law degree, was tapped to be the cannabis licensing manager, aka Cannabis Tsarina for some. I shunned that when I was there. I was tasked with helping to write the first non-retail commercial cannabis ordinance, and it's important to distinguish for folks that are not familiar. The retail, as I think Bryce indicated, came first, and that's been on the books for quite a while. The non-retail, so cultivation, manufacturing, distribution, took a bit longer. The potential impacts to community, neighborhoods, the environment tend to be more associated with the non-retail operations. Getting the ordinance written was definitely a group effort, and we knew that the end result would need many revisions. We described it as building the plane while flying. And Sam has done a great job identifying inconsistencies, areas where our code is at odds with the state regulations, which has been a work in progress. At the time, I was thinking about how to put my law license also into good use, and was asked by two other local attorneys specializing in cannabis law to join them. And in 2018, we formed Rice, Luxon, and Bolster-Grant. My goal was and is to use my knowledge and understanding of land use, the planning process, and our new ordinance to assist folks in navigating what I think is accurately described as a maze of regulations. Cannabis is more regulated than any other industry I'm aware of. Maybe mining rivals that. Sam can opine on that. But as the CLO manager, it was painfully clear that many of our would-be entrepreneurs did not have the requisite understanding of what it means to be regulated in that way. And indeed, the vast majority of the original 800 plus registrants, folks who thought they wanted a chance to be a part of the legalized industry. The vast majority of those folks have been unable for a variety of reasons to secure permits and licenses. And part of that is the ordinance itself and how we deal with land use in the county. Zoning, the existence of sensitive habitat, proximity to neighbors, all of those really have limited where commercial cannabis can occur in this county. And as a result, the majority of it occurs by design in the southern part of the county in commercial ag zoned land. And we can talk a little bit more about the implication of that. But the program under Sam's leadership has produced a decent number of licensed cannabis businesses who are successful. They're paying taxes. That tax revenue is going up. And we'll talk about that a little bit more as well. So enough about me. Let's get into our panel discussion. We're going to start talking about regulation, no surprise. I'd like each of our panelists to talk about their perspective on, and you've touched on this in your introduction, the development of our regulations, but what doesn't work or doesn't work as well as it could be, and how could we improve the non-retail, and then we'll get into the retail as well if Bryce has input on that. But Darren, what would you like to see if you had the power as far as changes to our current ordinance?
I think that our current regulations are a body of work that's always being refined and understood. A lot of regulation comes down actually to interpretation and application. And you mentioned a heavily regulated industry. I came from finance. I traded on an exchange for 15 years, and we had 3 regulators, FINRA, the SEC, and NYSE Reg. And there's no industry more heavily regulated than finance, for good reason. Those guys are scumbags and pretty good at fleecing customers. But in general, I actually kind of like our regulations. I feel like the Board of Supervisors and the licensing office has open ears, and they always want to understand like how to find that balance between operators and their ability to add economic value to the community and be good actors, and also being able to protect the public and make sure that we don't have a get out of jail free card. So I think that it's pretty good. The dialogue's there. It's constantly learning. It's learning from our mistakes. It's learning from other jurisdictions, the state and the other local jurisdictions' mistakes. I feel that honestly, there's not a lot that I would change that I don't, that I can't feel I can have the ability to affect change. I wish the building department moved faster. They're really the holdup. I don't feel like the current regulations are with cannabis licensing is the problem right now. But yeah, it'll continue to evolve, and we'll continue to have dialogue and refine them and figure out how to interpret, figure out how to make sure that we're meeting our responsibilities, but still able to operate and create jobs and run a business. For a bit of perspective, when I was trading in finance, I spent about 40% of my time managing regulatory bodies, answering questions and creating standard operating procedures to ensure we were within the confines of the regs. They were really open to interpretation. They're very gray in finance, and right now I think that we spend about 20% of our time. So I feel like there's a good balance right now, and I just want to see it continue where it's at, and we improve, and regulators improve, and we learn how to work together to create a viable industry and take advantage of the opportunity that's really opening up, and not get in each other's way, and just still, like you said, create something that all stakeholders can be proud of and feel like they have their voices heard, whether it's neighbors, whether it's parents, whether it's, you know, other businesses, competitors, whatnot. But the dialogue's there right now, and I think it's working.
Nice. Bryce, how about with respect to retail and maybe not just the regulations, but also, as Darren alluded to, process? Where do things get bogged down? Where could things be revised to improve if they need improvement?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we've been walking down this road for so long that we actually have a pretty good system that works. One thing that, you know, I've advocated for, especially with the rollout of state regulations, is for the local jurisdictions here regulating us to mirror state regulations as much as possible, so we don't have a layer over another layer, which, you know, puts us at a competitive disadvantage or creates additional burdens or hurdles when we're trying to compete with businesses that are outside of this area. And I think that one thing that Sam's office has been very proactive and really done a good job on is refining the ordinance to mirror state regulations. So there's, you know, for the most part, most of it, there's a parity there. There's not certain restrictions or things we have to focus on that are county specific so much as far as our operating guidelines that aren't the same as what the state requires. And so I think that's one thing I think works really well, and I'm grateful to the county and, you know, other jurisdictions that have done that, such as Watsonville and Santa Cruz. One, you know, I mirrored Darren. I think the biggest frustration is for a business operator that's trying to expand or grow their business, you know, just the complete and utter inefficiencies and lack of proactive urgency at the building and planning departments is, you know, incredibly costly and frustrating. And, you know, I don't think it's just their fault. I think it's an entire system that needs a benefit of an upgrade and more support and more funding to, you know, kind of get with the times to streamline those things. You know, one example is I have a project in Santa Cruz City that we're now on the 3rd year of waiting to get our building permit. And so, you know, when you're paying rent and missing out on opportunity and having to cover consultants and revise plans, and those things, you know, add up and actually cause a lot of businesses to fail. And so, you know, I think a more streamlined process to get from start to finish would be helpful, but that's not really a regulatory issue. It's a, you know, it's a systemic issue that affects every small business trying to operate in Santa Cruz County and, you know, the state at large, really. But aside from that, you know, I think that my biggest concerns with regulation are at a state level. The county's done a great job, and, you know, that's where we focus. I'd say 95% of our time now is trying to lobby and educate and inform and refine some of the issues at the state level. And I think that that's primarily, you know, they created 3 different governmental organizations out of the air to regulate a entrenched industry that was made up of cowboys and pirates, and trying to get them to come over to behave and become good actors has been an incredible challenge. And I think there's a lot of those cowboys and pirates that have, you know, gotten rid of the guns and the eye patches and have put on suits and done their homework and are phenomenal actors. But anything that is a multi-billion-dollar industry, before you regulate it, trying to create the rules you know, overnight, there's always going to be issues. And I think the drafters of Prop 64 were much more refined and careful than they would be otherwise. And so I think that necessity to try to, you know, walk before you run really has hindered business in a lot of ways as far as how we operate. But hopefully now that we have, you know, 3 years of legal cannabis underway, some of those restrictions and just inconsistencies will get absolved. So I think that's my biggest thing. The other thing is, you know, as I mentioned, I have a couple different businesses. There's 3 different government organizations at the state level that I get to deal with depending upon which business. And some of them have us do the exact same things in different ways, and they don't communicate very well with each other. And so I think that Governor Newsom is going to consolidate all of those agencies under the Bureau of Cannabis Control over the coming months. And I think once that's finalized, it's going to take some time. I think that'll actually streamline things and help quite a bit. So.
Right on. Sam, I know that we've been through a number of recent revisions, and it sounds like maybe the issues that folks might be having are less with the ordinance language itself and more with sort of coordination. So are there any, number one, are there any changes that you see coming to the actual ordinance language, or anything that is being done or contemplated to assist with coordination between agencies on the local level?
On the local level, you know, the planning and building departments, they have their own goals to improve, to do process improvement. And they are independent from our cannabis licensing office. We do coordinate with them as much as possible, but they really are independent. So it's hard for me to speak on their behalf in any way. I think for the most part, our regulations the changes to the ordinance have really been focused on operational changes, and, you know, operational for the businesses, and we're not really tweaking land use per se. So one of the things that I think we will continue to evolve with is aligning with the state on operational issues. And we've had some frustration in that regard because, as I previously stated, the state has discretion and they change things. Whether that discretion is actually in line with state law is very questionable, and it creates burdens on operators locally and us as regulators, because there are certain things where we've had enforcement actions with our state partners and we've let them take the lead because, you know, they're our state partners. We don't always align with their reasoning or the way that they approach things, but you know, we'll continue to evolve with them, and I'm really hopeful that as the consolidation of the state agencies happens, there will be new people at the top who don't disregard law and actually make the regulations align with state law, because that's an issue. I mean, that was the basis for us, the county, being the lead plaintiff in a lawsuit against the state on the delivery service issue, which the state ultimately caved to. And those are the types of things where it would be much easier if the state just looked at their law and said, oh yeah, we're interpreting the regulations improperly, we'll modify that. They don't. They put a line in the sand and they fight. And it's frustrating at the local level to have to deal with that, but
Sure.
That's how it goes.
I know early on, and just as somebody who deals with a variety of folks with different land use issues other than just cannabis, I can say the frustration about planning and building is shared across all types of developments, and that it's been that way for a while, and you know, people also don't like to be regulated. So there's that that comes into play. I know a while back there was a discussion. I was an advocate at the time. I'm not wedded to it now, but the idea of consolidating the licensing office with planning, has that been tossed out as infeasible, Sam?
Currently, that goal in our operational plan has shifted, and the cannabis licensing office is likely to remain independent for the next few years. You know, the goal was to consolidate, I believe, by June 2021.
Mm-hmm.
But we have a good, efficient program running right now, and I think that as our program has evolved, the county sees our operations as worthy of staying separate. Plus, we have this good synergy with the sheriff's office that would be difficult to move them into the fourth floor, and there's some logistical issues because we have this balance across agencies right now that needs to be maintained to maintain the efficiency of the office, as well as our ability to respond as quickly as we do. I think we're very nimble now, and it would be difficult to incorporate that.
Understood. Steve, any changes that you'd like to see to the enforcement scheme? I know that was overhauled fairly recently to give you folks more tools. Anything else in terms of enforcement that you'd like to see that we don't have now?
No, I think the recent changes to the ordinance has been helpful. And what I mean by that is, you know, previously the violations, you know, it had a very small monetary value. So the, you know, first time offense would be $2,500, and we, the sheriff, we're not in the business of generating revenue by our work. But what we found very quickly with the industry, with the illicit operators is, you know, $2,500 is not significant at all to encourage people not to do illegal. If they're making $100,000 off of one crop, that's just the price of doing business. And so I think with the ordinance change, the way it's been changed, it's allowing us to effectively get the attention of the illicit operators, and they're really having to make a conscious choice of, do I want to be illicit and potentially face the consequences, or do I want to be legal? And so it'd probably be worrisome if you ever, you know, hear the police say that they like the ordinance, the way it's working. But I've talked with Sam a lot about this, that honestly, the ordinance, in my opinion, works very well to support enforcement efforts. It allows a lot of latitude to settle cases and work with people on their situations. But, you know, I talk with agencies throughout the state of California, and there's a lot of communities that are ineffectively supporting their lawful operators because their ordinance or how they're doing their enforcement efforts, they're just, you know, if you talk about LA, for instance, LA has, this is a year ago, but they had 300 illegal storefronts. And I couldn't imagine if I was a lawful operator and I had a storefront across the street from 2 unlawful operators, and I'm following the rules and paying a lot of taxes, and then there's a place right across the street from us that's undercutting everything I'm doing. So with that said, the ordinance, I feel like we're staying ahead of these problems. You don't hear about unlawful dispensaries opening in Santa Cruz County. The change with the delivery service has allowed us to actually start to do delivery service enforcement, so that the operators in Santa Cruz County aren't competing with a company from Oakland who's driving a car down here with you know, ice coolers full of product and just meeting people in the parking lots and selling them whatever product they'd like. And then when you've got a you know, brick and mortar store a block away that's, you know, following every regulation that's thrust upon them. So to summarize, I'm happy with the ordinance the way it is, and it's been the adjustment to the ordinance has been a great improvement for us to do our work out in the field. So
Excellent. Let's talk more about some of the issues of broader concern for the community that are really specific, mostly to cultivation, odor, and environmental impacts, such as the use of pesticides. Sam, can you tell me if you have received neighbor complaints regarding odor? If so, what actions have been taken to ensure that issue does not negatively impact neighborhoods?
So our office has received 1 odor complaint since I've been in the office. And that odor complaint, what we've done with odor complaints, this is our policy, but we've only had 1, is we actually work with the Monterey Bay Air Pollution Control District, because they have the ability, right? They have the scientific background to assess odor. And with that 1 odor complaint, it was actually from a tenant on a property that had another tenant that was growing cannabis. So the odor wasn't actually ever verified because nobody could smell anything beyond the property bounds. Other than that, we haven't had pesticide issues either. And I think one of the key things that's very interesting about the regulated market is the pesticide detection levels are in the parts per billion range. And it actually creates this issue where if there is a pesticide detection, it's very hard to remediate the pesticides, because the California Department of Public Health, who would ensure the remediation protocols are met, they have crazy standards that they want to see proven science that shows that the remediation method is effective, but nobody remediates food or other agricultural commodities to the parts per billion range. So they've effectively created a standard that can't be met. And it's ruined farms. It's ruined manufacturers who, they have 1 or 2 crops a year, especially for our outdoor folks, and they have a pesticide detection that may or may not be there because we're talking parts per billion. The equipment is only so good. And then their crop can't be remediated. And they've invested all this money into it, but the CDPH effectively stops them from even attempting a remediation plan. So that's how it goes. We haven't had any pesticide complaints. Most cannabis farmers are using some organics, or they're called FIFRA exempt pesticides. I'm sure Darren can speak in a much better fashion and more clear about this. But yeah, no pesticide issues. Water, people have been concerned with water discharges from places. And I think that that's really important to understand. The Regional Water Quality Control Board actually regulates discharges, makes people test their water that they are discharging. These things don't happen on farms, on non-cannabis farms. The bar is much higher for cannabis. It actually, the testing protocols align with the same testing that's done at ready-mix concrete plants, mining operations, and hazardous waste facilities. So I think people should rest assured that there is oversight, and the testing protocols are incredibly stringent on water discharges from cannabis farms, which a lot of people don't realize. So
Right.
I've actually let my kids watch TV for 1 hour now. So I'm going to go check on them. I'll try to come back to the meeting, but I told them I'd give them an hour today.
Thanks, Sam. Understood. So that leads me into the issue of testing broadly, not so much just water, but testing for contaminants, which is one of the most onerous regulations impacting growers, manufacturers. So maybe Darren, can you talk about the testing process specific to contaminants, pesticides, mold, and what the benefits are to the consumer as onerous as those regulations are?
Yeah, first I need to test my audio. Can you guys hear better?
That sounds good.
Okay. Okay, good. I was hearing, I guess my headset was messed up. So yeah, one of the great things about California cannabis, and one of the things I think that the regulators did get right, and I'm talking about the state level, is they really sat down, the water board, a lot of environmental agencies, the water board, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the California Ag Commissioners, and they said, okay, what's working right now in commercial ag and what doesn't? And if this is a new industry coming in, cannabis cultivation, let's figure out how to implement some procedures and some guidelines that can make sure that we're not creating an environmental disaster, which we can't do with our traditional crops because the cat's out of the bag. It's very hard to go back and rewind the clock. So they really sat down and they came up with a general order. For the water board, they came up with the Fish and Wildlife to make sure that we're not causing environmental harm, and it's working pretty well. There are strict regulations, but it really gives us an opportunity to hone our cultivation skills and do it in concert with our environment and our natural surroundings. And actually, we're a regenerative farm. We have a triple goal of increasing the environment, increasing economics, and increasing fruit quality, and that's all done by our cultivation methods, which ties into the testing that you're talking about at the state level. This opportunity in cannabis that we don't have in blueberries is we sell our products, they have to pass unbelievably stringent requirements for any sort of pesticide, contaminants. Obviously, we're not using pesticides, but they're so high that we have to figure out how to ensure that our neighboring farms that are using conventional pesticides aren't contaminating our crops. And the threshold is so crazy that if one of our neighbors is spraying pesticides, we literally have to shut down our entire greenhouse and make sure the prevailing winds are going the right way so that any sort of overspray, even a minute amount of overspray, doesn't get anywhere near our crops. And again, we've been able to figure this out, and a lot of other cultivators are figuring it out. So we're growing organically. We're using regenerative practices to improve soil health, keep our topsoil on the ground, not flowing down the rivers. We are constantly making sure, also working with the water board to make sure that we're lowering our input use. There was just a study that came out the other day that says the amount of water that's used on an average acre of cannabis in California is like 1/3 other crops. So we're really doing a good job of reducing our use of resources. The nitrogen's not floating down the river. We're keeping it, on site. We're using cover crops to make sure that the inputs are staying here and we can reuse them year and year. And we're actually making a huge investment into our soils, which just wasn't done before with any other crop. So it is working out pretty well, and there's room for improvement, but the ball's headed in the right direction. Like I had mentioned, we're reducing not only our pesticide use, but we're also helping others learn how to make sure their pesticide isn't flowing into neighboring parcels and contaminating organic crops. And the big thing, which is really awesome, is the heavy metals. People have no idea the amount of heavy metals they're consuming with their food products. It doesn't matter whether it's organic or conventional, it's just not tested for. And when the heavy metal testing first came out, I was like, what is this? Like, this is ridiculous. And the more research I did, the more I understand that very, very, very small amounts of heavy metals, infinitesimal amounts of heavy metals, are extremely damaging to humans, in particular children. So you're doing the best job you can. You're feeding your children these high quality, high cost organic foods. And if you were testing them for heavy metals, you would see that the levels of cadmium, mercury, lead, and arsenic in them are damaging their brain development and their ability to fire synapses at the molecular level. So they really did, the state regulators really did get this one right. We have a list of over 400 different inputs used in agriculture that we've tested for heavy metals with Santa Cruz labs. We have all kinds of different thresholds of what's safe to use on your crop, what you can't use. And by the way, we're organic, we're regenerative organic. These are all organic inputs that a lot of commercial growers are using on their food crops. And I mean, I'd say 75% of them we wouldn't even consider using on our cannabis crops, simply because of the heavy metal content. And cannabis also is what we call a hyper accumulator, where it has a voracious appetite for pulling up stuff, and in particular cadmium. Cadmium is very similar to zinc, and late in the plant's life, if it has a desire for zinc, to push zinc into its fruit, and the zinc's not there, it'll pull cadmium up. So we do sap testing to make sure that the levels of micronutrients are available for our plants, so they leave the heavy metals and don't pull them up, and that gets all the way down to the consumer level. So when a regulated cannabis product gets to the consumer, it's tested for, as Sam mentioned, parts per billion for heavy metals and pesticides. And the great thing about cannabis that we don't have in other food crops is the grower can get paid for the chemical compounds, so the cannabinoids and the terpenes. So we're actually able to produce a more nutrient-dense, flavorful, aromatic crop with our cultivation practices, and we're rewarded for growing that. Whereas our blueberries, which everyone says are the best blueberries they've ever tasted, it's just an organic product. It's just a label that says organic, and we don't really get a premium for that, but we are able to get a premium for growing really nutrient-dense, wholesome crops. So I feel this is something the state got right. The molds, in particular aspergillus, there are some other crops that they test for aspergillus. There's 4 types of aspergillus that could cause a problem. They produce mycotoxins, but we also test for mycotoxins. And there hasn't been one positive mycotoxin test in the state yet. So growers are doing a really good job of producing a healthy crop.
Excellent. Thank you. I've got a lot more to cover, so I'm going to try to get to some more topics, but thank you. Bottom line, if it's legal, it doesn't have a bunch of junk in it. So I want to talk just briefly about THC levels. Bryce, I'm going to shift this to you. I know that there are some other jurisdictions that have regulated THC, at least I've heard that. Today's cannabis is not the stuff that I may have experimented with in high school. Talk about THC levels, any limitations on that, and if you would, Is there anything that you or other shops that you know of do to educate your consumers about what they're buying and the impacts it may have on them in terms of THC?
Yeah, I think the Department of Public Health put a lot of thought into this before rolling out adult use. And, there was some models and inspiration to draw from with other states that had regulated sooner than that. But prior to January 1 of 2018, you could walk into my dispensary and buy an edible that had 1,000 milligrams of THC in it. That maybe didn't have that, and that edible maybe didn't have clear serving sizes that were delineated that would break down into easily identifiable segments. So, for instance, one of the most popular edibles was from a company called Perova, and it was 1,000 milligram brownie. So what the kind of landscape is now, well, and we'll get into that. So generally, edibles convert in your liver, and they actually have a different chemical composition than when you combust them. And so they can be 9 times more psychoactive than when you're smoking a joint. And so I think that is a lot of times why people that have had experiences with edibles have a very uncomfortable experience. They get too high. It lasts a long time. It takes quite a bit of time for the body to metabolize. It can take, sometimes 2 hours before you even feel it after you've ingested it. So it's a completely different animal than smoking a joint or combusting the flower. And so, I think that the state wanted to balance the fact that there was medical patients that had been depending upon this medicine for a number of years with the onset of a whole new type of consumer that is using this as a recreational product and doesn't have the tolerance to do high dosing. And so the regulations now are any cannabis product that is an edible, something that you ingest, cannot be in excess of more than 100 milligrams of THC per package. And all of those, it has to have no more than a 10 milligram serving size. So that means if I'm selling you a brownie, I either need to cut it into 10 pieces that are 10 milligrams each, or I need to have a diagram very clear that's the same size as the brownie that you can cut it yourself, to ensure that people aren't over consuming or having a bad experience. So I think that that's been kind of a big change, is that the actual allowable amount of edible THC per edibles has decreased. What I believe that the state did right, though, is for patients that are used to a higher dosing in a medical, you can have up to 1,000 milligrams in, say, a tincture or a capsule. So something that can't be easily mistaken as something else, something that's not appealing to children. Those are the higher dose products that you can ingest. As far as potency for THC, and a very unfortunate kind of just thing that happened with regulation is because the taxes are so much higher than, or the price of the product essentially increased between 30 and 50% overnight for people that were shopping at dispensaries. One misnomer that consumers now equate to being better is higher THC. So you're seeing a lot of really viable and amazing strains of flower that have different chemical and aromatic profiles that are really beneficial for a variety of ailments disappear because they don't test more than 20% THC. And so what we've seen in the California marketplace in the last couple of years is 30% THC, 25% THC, anything under 20%, dispensaries aren't purchasing because consumers, for the most part, aren't coming in and buying. And there's this misconception as a consumer that the higher the THC, the better the product. And frankly, that's just incorrect. And so, what you're seeing, a backlash of a lot of more community focused, medicinal focused, holistic health management focused dispensaries are really such as TreeHouse, which is the dispensary that I operate in Santa Cruz County. We're really pushing to eliminate the perception that more THC is better and focus on the terpenes. The terpenes are chemical constituents that are found in a variety of fruits and plants, and they're what give things their aroma, but they also have medicinal qualities. So limonene is that citrusy smell you smell in limes and lemons. Well, it's also really prevalent in cannabis. It's known to provide alertness. It can have a host of medicinal effects and other ways to increase your feelings, whether it's decreasing your energy, providing clarity, allowing people to calm down and sleep. So those are what we focus on, is those chemical components. And we're really working on teaching our patients and our customers that, if they felt a certain way from a different strain, it's not necessarily because of the THC, it's because of the terpene concentration of that strain. And so that's kind of where we're at with potency, in a nutshell.
Okay, and in terms of educating your consumers about what they're buying, how much time and energy do you spend on education when folks are coming into your shop and may not know what they're buying?
Yeah, I mean, I would say at TreeHouse, we probably spend more time and money educating our staff on a regular and frequent basis of the variety of products that we have and the difference in the changing science and understanding of cannabinoids than probably any dispensary maybe in the state. I mean, it's incredibly important to us. And so, you know, they carry that knowledge and are there to consult and help all of our customers that come through the door. We never try to rush people and, you know, kind of have a culture that if I have a certain staff that doesn't know something, he'll tell them and either help them find it or go to another staff to help that person kind of get the education or the information that they're looking for. So I think with something that's changing and evolving as fast as cannabis is, and with the myriad of different products on the market, education is such a crucial component.
Right on. Steve, what has been your experience, if any, in terms of in Santa Cruz County, folks driving under the influence of cannabis? Is that a problem that we see here? And is there a way to test drivers for being under the influence? I know it's sort of kind of urban legend that folks think that they're not impaired, but that's, I would say, I would put that into the classification of urban legend. Can you speak to that at all?
We don't do a lot of enforcement generally as a sheriff's office for, we're not the primary investigators of driving under the influence. I can't really speak to the totality of it. You know, I mean, it's been, driving impairment's been around, you know, I mean, forever. I think they are moving, because of legalization, they're moving, they're through a lot of grant process and stuff, trying to find out what the appropriate level of impairment is for cannabis. I think it's just going to take some time to figure out what that is. You know, I mean, one of the board aides was run over and killed by someone that was extremely impaired under cannabis. But I think a lot of impairment was occurring before legalization. I can't speak to if there's been a spike in impairment, cannabis impairment, you know, driving under the influence. So, but I think they are working on more methods to determine what the appropriate level of impairment is. I mean, no level of impairment you shouldn't be driving when you're impaired, period. As with alcohol, they're trying to determine what an acceptable level is. So
right. So we talked about this a little bit before we started. We know that there are impacts of cannabis on the brain development of young people, even if the data is a little confusing at this point. Sam, I'll put this to you. Do you think that the buffer zones that we have and the restrictions on advertising and signage are doing their job to help ensure that our youth are adequately protected?
I think they are effective. The degree to which I can't fully explain, but I think one of the key things to legalization that it's going to take years, probably about 10 years in my mind, to really take effect is cannabis is just so widely available in the community. And really it's widely available in California. It's not specific to our community by any means, but legalization will decrease the availability of cannabis to youth significantly over time. And I think that that's one of the key things that a lot of people don't talk about, right? I grew up in California. Weed was everywhere. Like it was much easier to get weed in high school than it was to get alcohol. And I think that that's probably still true to this day. But I think in 7 more years or so, you're going to see cannabis and alcohol be on the same plane of availability. And that's going to be a huge driver to decreased youth access. I think the current regulations are beneficial. And ultimately, you're never going to get the guy on the corner off the streets, right? They're always going to be there to some extent. But if we can decrease that over time, it'd be great.
Do you think that efforts to bring the smaller grows into compliance through regulation, number one, is feasible? or number two, could help alleviate impacts on neighborhoods, the environment, and our youth?
Yes, I think we can bring the smaller grows into the legal market. I don't think that's an issue in the long term. I think it's going to take some time to get neighborhood perception to realign with reality. That part is going to be the most difficult portion of getting these smaller operations in our mountainous community legalized. I think one of the largest drivers to the illicit market currently, though, is something that we haven't talked about, which is taxes. Taxes at the state level are incredibly high. The county level people complain about, right? And we're at 6% gross receipts. But when you actually break down a cannabis product from the time it goes from the cultivation to the time it goes to the retail, what the end point consumer usually is paying is between 42 and 50% of the actual cost is taxes. And people don't want to talk about that, right? The state doesn't want to talk about that. The state likes the fact that they're taking in so much money. But in reality, you can never drive the illicit market out of commission completely if the monetary gains are so high, right? And that's the hardest thing for the legal market to compete with, is they can't compete with black market weed. It just costs so little to make. And then people in the illicit market are stoked because they're making more money than ever because they can charge more because the regulated market has taken such a hit in terms of cost, right? You used to go into a shop and be able to buy premium cannabis for $50 an eighth and walk out the door. Now it might be $50 or $60 an eighth, and then they're going to add on 15% excise tax and a 10% sales tax. It's crazy. That's what drives the illicit market. And if we as a society don't come to terms with that, they're never really going to go away.
You totally took my next topic. Thank you very much. The taxation. And I think Bryce touched on that as well, that not only does it, is that a driver for the black market, it also arguably has a relationship to THC content, people thinking that they want more bang for their buck because it's so expensive. And that's not necessarily a great outcome for anyone. So the last little bit of time, I want to hear a little bit more from Steve about whether our legalization here has had any impact, negative impact on overall crime and crime rates that you've been able to detect, or whether it's around retail or the folks operating around the county.
I don't have any statistics. I didn't prepare for that, but I think generally crime related to cannabis, in most of it is the illicit market. You know, I mean, obviously the storefronts, we're still having, you know, rocks thrown through the window and they're going in and trying to take product. But for the most part, the crime that's associated with the cannabis industry is the illicit industry, and it's oftentimes you know, armed robberies, deals gone bad, murders based off of illicit cultivations. So I don't have the data to be able to say there's been an increase or decrease in crimes associated with cannabis, but just knowing it continues, and but a lot of it is associated with the illicit market. And you know, the cannabis shops in general, even more so, I'd say pretty much across the board, we receive very little complaints about, you know, shoulder tapping or issues that accompany, you know, liquor stores, right? And I think over time, as Sam said, when liquor and cannabis are more like, it's just not even, you don't even think about it. There may be a little bit more of the juvenile access, possibly based at that level of what we have for liquor right now. But the cannabis shops are so highly regulated and follow such strict security, you know, allowing people in the store the way they do and monitoring their checking. I mean, there's not a lot of diversion at the storefront level or diversion that I'm seeing for the legal side, more so than we're just seeing continuously with the illicit market.
Got it. Thank you. The last piece I want to talk to, have everybody speak to a little bit, as much as I can squeeze it in, are opportunities for the future, and also, and I'm going to direct this first question to Sam. Talk about disparity between large grows, small grows, north mid parts of the county, south part of the county. There's been concern that our regulations are unfairly benefiting large corporate growers. No offense to Darren, of course, that's not you, that have access to greater investment opportunities. Sam, is this something that that you guys talk about? Are you seeing it? And if so, is there anything that the county can do to create maybe a more level playing field?
It's something that, we hear people's concerns about the issue. But at the end of the day, we're meant to regulate the market. And we're not in the business of stopping businesses from being businesses. We can't incentivize a lot of the small growers who don't want to grow in the South County. And that's been one of the biggest things with the illicit market. We have a lot of people who just don't want to even try in the South County. But if you want to try, we'll help you through the process. That's for sure. We'll explain the regulations. We have tools and things to help people understand what they're getting into. But at the end of the day, costs associated with a state license are substantially high, right? For a medium, I think that the cost for a medium license, a 22,000 square foot license, depending on what you want, ranges from like 25,000 to 77,000 for a license just to grow. You don't get anything for that money.
Right.
So that's a disincentive for the smaller operator that we can't help them with. We do have an equity program that we can offset those costs with, but we've been pushing this equity program for months. We've only had one applicant. How do we fix that? I wish I could tell you. We've tried. It's not working out.
Yep. I hear you. Darren, anything from you on this issue of inequity between small growers, large growers, and the idea that we're going to become corporate in terms of cannabis over the coming years?
Yeah, thanks, Robin. Hopefully everyone can hear me.
Yep.
Yeah, we're one of the operators. We're trying to teach people how to fish and not give them fish. I think Santa Cruz County is well poised right now. We focus on collaboration, innovation, and regeneration. Our style of growing, like I said, it's all about impacting the environment in a positive way and actually making it a better place. We want to teach people how to do that. We're starting with cannabis because, like I said, there's opportunity to get premiums for more nutrient-dense crops. We also grow blueberries. We know Santa Cruz County has long been a hotbed for breeders, so we're working with a lot of breeders around here to commercialize their life's work that they've been working on in the shadows for many years, and that's going really well. We collaborate with everybody. We've helped a lot of growers come out of the hills and figure out how to apply for licenses. I just literally got done at 10 o'clock today helping another grower apply for her state license. So we're going to continue doing this, and if people want to help make Santa Cruz County a great place to grow high quality cannabis and other crops, then we're going to work with them. And the complaint department's open on Sundays, so the growers that want to complain about not having a fair playing field, it's just going to fall on deaf ears because it's Santa Cruz, the people here are so collaborative and we all get it. And one thing, Robin, real quick, as the questions come up, a lot of the stakeholders, neighbors, they really want to understand CEQA categorical exemptions and help them understand why we're not getting an environmental get-out-of-jail-free card, but we have such stringent environmental protections in place going through the permitting process. They really want to understand because it looks horrible when it's like this is exempted from CEQA. I think it would help if you can explain to them why we have those exemptions.
Sure. So CEQA, as folks may know, evaluates the impact on the environment, a variety of different aspects of our environment. that are posed by any specific project. Each cannabis permit and license is a project. But as Darren said, Santa Cruz County has some of the most stringent environmental protection ordinances on the books anywhere. And that was one of my old jobs 1,000 years ago, was to implement those in terms of riparian protection, biotic, timber, water, you name it. And so by definition, folks that get permits and or license have to be in compliance with the existing regulations. Therefore, there is no anticipated negative impact of the project because they're already in compliance. So that equates to an exemption. Anything exceeding any exceptions that people want to, say, a riparian setback would trigger a higher level of review under CEQA. And there's a whole long discussion I could go into about our ordinance and how we applied CEQA, but essentially the county made each individual licensee responsible for their own CEQA compliance rather than taking the entire ordinance and completing an EIR on the ordinance. Again, there's a whole lot I could talk about that. I won't. There's a history to that. But rest assured, as I said in the beginning, cannabis is more highly regulated than virtually any other industry, certainly in this county and in most counties. And from water, energy, environmental protection, lack of pesticides, noise, odor, visual resources, you name it, all of those things are on the books, and every single licensee has to comply with all of that in order to be in the running. So we've taken everybody's concerns into consideration, and that's what Sam does day in, day out. That is all I have. I can't see the chat, so I'll open it up. Are there any questions from folks listening in? Please weigh in.
Robin, I just wanted to weigh in on CEQA real quick, because this has been a challenge for our department as we've moved the CEQA determinations into licensing. But we've worked diligently with our partners at the state level. It took us 9 months to develop a streamlined process. And Santa Cruz County, and our tiny department of 6 people, 2 sheriffs, Steve would be our 7th person actually, and our resource planner. Our CEQA determination process and analysis process, and ultimately CEQA reporting, is what the state California Department of Food and Agriculture uses as its example. So just to put a sense of how much effort we put into this and how much we've done to show diligence in environmental analysis, the state has actually been using us for 4 months as the example for all municipalities and localities in the state.
Excellent. Let's see. So let's talk. We got a question from somebody asking whether growers have a duty or a responsibility to inform their neighbors about their plans. I know the answer to that, but I will let Sam weigh in on when neighbor noticing is required for a cannabis operation.
So neighbor noticing is required if it is what's deemed a level 4 commercial development permit, and only in those circumstances, or a level 5, which would include a public notice. So generally those are for our zones other than the commercial agricultural zone district, or within the commercial agricultural zone district if they intend to put up any structures that aren't permit exempt, or if they wish to do manufacturing. And I think the big game changer for the commercial agricultural zone district is the fact that industrial hemp is legal. There's no way to stop it because it's protected by right to farm bills, and industrial hemp and cannabis are the same genus and species of plant. So that has really changed where cannabis is being grown, and that's why large portions of the South County smell like cannabis. It's actually not cannabis. There's over a 10-fold differentiation or increase, or size increase in industrial hemp being grown versus cannabis. So
Point.
some of those odors people talk about are actually hemp.
Right. And I think it's also important to point out that licenses are not forever. Licenses are renewable annually. Maybe you could talk, Sam, a little bit more about that and about your quarterly inspections that you do of all licensed facilities.
So we do basically like a minor compliance audit on every site, where we go through and we do an operational audit of those sites every quarter. In addition to that, the licenses are renewed on an annual basis. So if there are issues at a site, we will generally issue notices of correction if they're very minor issues. If they're a major issue, it would be a notice of violation, or a major issue could lead to immediate license revocation. Luckily, we've only had a few notices of violations issued for our local industry. Most of them have been small technical issues. And if someone has 3 violations in any one year, that is cause for license revocation at the local level. And if those 3 are actual notices of violations, we repeal the license and the person can't renew that license for 3 years.
Okay, excellent. Can you give us a number? I know you just had a report to the board, and this is again for Sam, on current number of licensed cultivators in the county. Ballpark.
37. We have 51 licenses issued total, 11 manufacturers, 12 manufacturers, lots of combined licenses, and hopefully by the end of the month we'll have 8 more cultivators licensed.
Good news. Let's see, I'm getting some questions, and let's talk a little bit about banking, and maybe Bryce, you can weigh in on this, and Darren as well. But so I know there are a couple of bills that have been put forth in the state legislature, also on the federal level, to ease the banking restrictions. What are cannabis folks doing in the meantime to deal with money issues in the absence of widespread availability of banking services? Bryce, we'll start with you.
Yeah, most of us work with local credit unions. There's very few banks, because they're FDIC insured, that will actually work with the cannabis industry. When they do, it's very selective and quiet. Banking's still an issue. We don't have access to small business loans. We don't get lines of credit. There's no lifelines. We didn't get any PPE or any grants or any help whatsoever during COVID, primarily because of the federal status of cannabis. The bill that passed through the state was essentially a bill allowing the regulatory agencies for cannabis to more effectively and easily share information with financial institutions. That the intention of that is that it hopes that process of streamlining information sharing will encourage more financial institutions to start banking cannabis companies. But honestly, until cannabis isn't a Schedule I drug and 280E gets repealed, most banks are going to choose to just not work with us. So it is a challenge, but thankfully we do have access to banking primarily through credit unions.
Okay. Steve, can you speak to any public safety issues around the lack of banking? Is that something that that you've seen impacts from or have concerns about?
Yeah, I mean, it's for the industry to have the safe banking. I think it's more difficult for everybody with regards to the way the banking is currently. Because it's still continuing to be a cash-based business, and legal operators are technically having to launder their money to run a business, and then it puts them at risk for being robbed, and so I think finding a resolution to that, I think, is going to make it easier for everybody on the regulation side and the operator side. It will actually help, I think, manage their businesses. The overall regulating cannabis will be much easier when there's an actual lawful way to bank. To Bryce's point, the credit unions that are allowing the banking. My understanding is they charge an exorbitant amount of money for those legal operators to use that banking system. So not only they're restricted on which banking institutions they can use, they're being charged this premium because of the risk to the credit union for allowing them to run their money through their business. So, but yeah, continued, robberies are the biggest problem.
Sure. We have a question about whether there's been any outreach to teachers regarding cannabis use among the youth. Anybody have a response to outreach? I think most of you guys work with CPP. Sam, anything that you can add, or anybody else, just unmute yourself and let me know.
There are quite a few industry participants with the Childhood Prevention Partners. I'm not aware of industry folks working directly with schools on youth education and prevention. But as a child of the DARE program, I will say DARE taught us all what to look for in drugs. That's for sure. Taught us what a joint should look like, taught us what cocaine should look like. And yeah, so it's a double-edged sword, and I don't know how to effectively assess that. And I think that the researchers don't know either what the best approach is.
Good point. Remembering the old, this is your brain on drugs. Yeah, we didn't tend to take that seriously, but yeah, wondering if that conversation about the issues of development, if that has any more of a receptive audience among our young people than it did back in the 80s. Got a couple of questions that are specific to like zoning regs. Somebody asked about setbacks to public rights of way. Those are in the ordinance, but yes, if you have a large parcel, 300 feet is generally the required setback. I won't get into a whole bunch of details in the ordinance, but somebody else asked about visibility from public roads, from surrounding properties. Sam, maybe you can weigh in on that as well. How to balance security and open vistas, not looking like Fort Knox, and visibility from sensitive receptors. It's an interesting policy challenge for sure.
Definitely. And so the cannabis plant cannot be seen from the public right away. I think that's key to note. But cannabis related security infrastructure or other infrastructure can be seen from the public right away. And what we've seen that many of our operators who have a public right-of-way vantage point, they plant other crops in front of the cannabis to obscure the view, or they will, the planning department may require them to do some sort of tree planting or other vegetative break. But I know there's been some controversy around this issue, particularly with people planting other crops and putting hoop houses in to obscure the view of their cannabis. Hoop houses are a thing, they're real. If they're being used to obscure the view of cannabis because they're growing, let's say, blueberries or blackberries, raspberries in those hoop houses, there's nothing the county can do about that because it's an allowed use in the commercial agricultural zone district, and some people get frustrated with that. But the CA zone is the CA zone, and it's meant to be used for commercial agriculture. There are people who live in and around it who don't like to see the optics change because they feel they're in a neighborhood, even though it really is a traditional agricultural area.
Right. We have another question about the setbacks to schools. We touched on that a little bit. It's 600 feet is what the state says, and we follow that as well. Have you had any issues with applying those setbacks? Anything else you want to speak to about folks that might have concerns about those setbacks?
Nope, setbacks are easy. They're in our code, in state law. That's what we follow.
Right on. Okay, I think that we have answered. Oh wait, yep, pretty sure. I think that's it. And it is just about 12:30. Thanks you guys so much for carving out some time, your Saturday morning. Precious, I know. And for county folks, this is a long weekend for you. So thank you doubly for participating, and our industry folks. I'm sure there will be other opportunities. This is the sort of entree. And I have to give a shout out to the League of Women Voters across the state. Not many organizations have wanted to delve into cannabis policy discussions. Still a little bit of a third rail. So bravo for them for making this happen. Thanks, everybody.